Before we begin, a word. Every voice you are about to hear could belong to a real person, and the next one could be yours. Claim a part and read it aloud at footnotesandfolly.click. Good evening, and welcome back to Footnotes and Folly. I am Professor Reginald St. John Pemberton, and this is the fourth part of John Lord's Ancient States and Empires, his sweeping schoolmaster survey of the whole ancient world, given here in plain modern English from Lord's own public domain text. The plain rendering and the asides are mine. Last time, we watched Jerusalem burn and its people led away weeping toward the rivers of Babylon. Tonight we follow those armies home, and turn to the great rival powers of the Tigris and the Euphrates, whose shadow has been lengthening over this whole story. We begin on the flat plain of Shinar, where a mighty hunter named Nimrod raised a tower toward heaven, and we shall see Nineveh rise on the Tigris under the legendary Ninus and Semiramis, and the terrible Assyrian kings Sennacherib and the rest storm city after city until, in a single generation, Nineveh itself is blotted from the earth. Then Babylon flares up one last time under Nebuchadnezzar, with walls a chariot could turn upon and gardens hung in the air, before it too falls in a night. And out of the eastern mountains come a new people, the Medes and the Persians, the sons of Japhet, and a king named Cyrus, the greatest soldier the Orient ever bred, who overturns them all and, almost as an afterthought of policy, sends the captives of Judah home. Lord asks us always to look past the pomp for the providence. Let us keep that in view and begin.
Very early, the Babylonian monarchy was founded on a great plain that formed the valley of the Euphrates. It was 400 miles long and 100 miles wide, bounded by Mesopotamia on the north, the Tigris on the east, the Persian Gulf on the south, and the Syrian desert on the west. The plain or valley covered about 23,000 square miles, the size of the Grecian territories. It had no striking natural features and an unbroken horizon. Only sand, hills, and the river embankments interrupted the view across its flat surface. Like the Nile, the river flooded, though less regularly, and left behind rich alluvial soil. The summers were intensely hot, while the winters were mild and pleasant. Wheat was native there, and vines and other fruits grew in great abundance. The land was as rich as the valley of the Nile and supported flocks and herds. The river was full of fish, and the country provided every means for an easy living. At the beginning of history, migrants from Armenia, the primeval seat of man, entered this fine land. Nimrod and his hunters then gained power over the earlier settlers and displaced them. Those settlers were Cushites, from the family of Ham rather than descendants of Shem. Nimrod's kingdom began with Babel, a tower or temple modeled on the one that had been left unfinished or destroyed. It was probably built in B.C. 2003, 134. It was square and rose in a series of stories, each smaller than the one beneath it, giving it a pyramidal shape. The highest stage held the sacred ark. The temple was made of burnt brick. Thus the race of Ham led the way in the arts in Chaldea, as it did in Egypt, and soon fell into idolatry. Nothing is known with certainty about this ancient monarchy, which is believed to have lasted 258 years from BC 2002, 134 to 1976. It was not established until after the dispersion of the races. The dynasty founded by Nimrod ended during the early years of Abraham. The first king of the new dynasty is thought to have been Chedorlaomer, although Josephus describes him as a general of the Chaldean king who extended Chaldean conquests into Palestine. His encounters with the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, and others in the Vale of Siddim, who were tributary princes, and his slaughter by Abraham's servants, are told in the 14th chapter of Genesis. They ended Chaldean conquest beyond the Syrian desert. Yet his alliance with Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, shows that races besides the Hamite composed the people of Chaldea, with the subjects of Chedorlaomer foremost among them. Arabs from the desert overthrew his empire in B.C. 1005, 118, and an Arabian dynasty is believed to have ruled for 245 years. This dynasty ended after a great invasion by Assyrians, who were of Semitic origin. Assur, the son of Shem, built Nineveh on the Tigris. The name Assyria was later applied to all of upper Mesopotamia, from the Euphrates to the Tigris Mountains. This country had rolling pastures broken by woodlands and watered by streams that flowed into the Tigris. Its valleys were rich, its hills beautiful, and its climate cooler than that of the Chaldean plain. Greek tradition suggests that Nineveh was governed by a viceroy of the Babylonian king. This agrees with Genesis, which makes the dynasty Chaldean, but the people Semitic, since the kingdom of Assur came from that of Nimrod. Smith describes the tradition this way. Ninus, the viceroy, revolts from the king of Babylon and overruns Armenia, Asia Minor, and the shores of the Euxine as far as Tanais. He subdues the Medes and Persians and makes war on the Bactrians. Semiramis, the wife of one of the chief nobles, comes to the camp before Bactria and captures the city by a bold stroke. Her courage wins the love of Ninus, and she becomes his wife. When he dies, she takes the throne and attempts the conquest of India, but she is defeated. These two sovereigns built Nineveh on a grand scale, and also added to the buildings of Babylon. This king founded the northwest palace of Nineveh. It was 360 feet long and 300 feet wide, and stood on a raised platform overlooking the Tigris. A grand facade on the north faced the town, while another on the west commanded the river. The palace was built of hewn stone. Its central hall was 120 feet long and 90 feet wide. Its ceilings were cedar brought from Lebanon, its walls were paneled with marble slabs decorated with bas-reliefs, and its floors were paved with stone. Rawlinson's Herodotus gives this description. All of this is tradition, but recent discoveries in cuneiform literature have shed light on it. From these discoveries, together with fragments from Deioces, a priest of Babylon in the 3rd century before Christ, and scattered notices in scripture history, it is inferred that the dynasty founded by Babylus ruled for more than 500 years, from 1272 to 747 before Christ. Of its kings, the most famous was Tiglath-Pileser, who added Babylonia to the Assyrian Empire and built immense architectural works. He used 360,000 men to build this palace. Some made brick, and others cut timber on Mount Hermon. It covered 8 acres. The palaces of Nineveh were magnificent. The scenes on their walls, discovered by Mr. Layard after being recently uncovered from mounds of earth, show the king as a figure of colossal size, fighting battles and dressed in symbolic attributes. He appears as a great warrior leading captives and storming cities, and also in the hunt, piercing the lion and pursuing the wild ass. This monarch must not be confused with the Tiglath-Pileser of the Greeks, the last of the preceding dynasty. His son, Shalmaneser, was also a great prince and enlarged the Assyrian Empire. Distant peoples paid him tribute: the Phoenicians, the Syrians, the Jews, and the Medians beyond the Tigris mountains. He defeated Ben-Hadad and routed Hazael. His reign is thought to have ended in B.C. 850. 2 other kings followed him and extended their conquests westward. Smith identifies the last of them with Pul, the reigning monarch, when Jonah visited Nineveh in B.C. 770. The next dynasty began with Tiglath-Pileser Roman II, who waged wars against Babylon, Syria, and Israel. This was in the time of Ahaz in B.C. 729. His son Shalmaneser made Hosea king of Israel his vassal. He reduced the land of the 10 tribes to a province of his empire and carried its people into captivity. Hezekiah was also his vassal for a time. Sargon succeeded him in B.C. 721, according to Smith, though others place his accession in 715 B.C. Sennacherib believed that he reigned only 2 or 3 years, while Rawlinson gave him 15 years. He built the magnificent palace whose ruins at Khorsabad have supplied the Louvre with some of its finest Assyrian remains. He was among the greatest Assyrian conquerors. He invaded Babylon and drove out its kings, defeated the Philistines, captured Ashdod and Tyre, received tribute from the Greeks at Cyprus, invaded Egypt itself, whose king paid him tribute, and conquered Media. His son Sennacherib came to the throne in B.C. 702. He is an especially interesting historical figure, and under him the Assyrian Empire reached its highest point. He added to the palace of Nineveh and built another palace greater than any that had existed before him. No monarch exceeded him in the splendor of his buildings. He erected no fewer than 30 temples, gleaming with silver and gold. One hall in his palace was 220 feet long and 101 feet wide. He employed Syrian, Greek, and Phoenician artists. It was from the ruins of this palace at Koyunjik that Mr. Layard made the valuable discoveries that enriched the British Museum. Sennacherib subdued Babylonia, Upper Mesopotamia, Syria, Phoenicia, Philistia, Idumea, and part of Egypt. Together with Media, part of Armenia, and the old Assyrian territory, these lands formed his vast empire, far greater than the Egyptian monarchy at any time. He also punished the Jews for encouraging a revolt among the Philistines, carried 200,000 people into captivity, and refrained from besieging Jerusalem only after Hezekiah gave him 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Some believe that the destruction of his host recorded in Scripture occurred during a later invasion of Judea, when Judea was allied with Egypt. Scripture says that he returned to Nineveh and lived there, only to be assassinated by his sons in B.C. 680. His son Esarhaddon succeeded him. He was a warlike monarch who fought the Egyptians and settled Babylonian colonists in Samaria. He also built the palace of Nimrod and encouraged art. Assyrian civilization reveals a diligent and patient people. Its greatest achievement was architecture. Its sculpture copied nature, but it possessed neither the grace nor the ideal quality of Greek sculpture. War was the chief occupation of its kings, and hunting was their amusement. The people suffered under the combined tyranny of kings and priests. Assyrian annals contain little of interest, and the small amount known about Assyrian life and customs has been drawn chiefly by inference from the monuments excavated by Botta and Layard. Rawlinson's learned treatise sheds light on the history of the monarchy, which had been extremely obscure before Layard's discoveries. Smith has made a very judicious abridgment of that treatise, and I have followed Smith. The mythology of the Assyrians would be interesting to examine, but it is too complicated for a work of this kind. Under Esarhaddon's successors, the empire declined rapidly. Although it nominally extended across all Western Asia, from the Mediterranean to the desert of Iran, and from the Caspian Sea and the mountains of Armenia to the Persian Gulf, it lacked unity. It included many kingdoms, cities, and tribes that merely paid tribute, and that tribute depended on the king's power to enforce it. The Assyrian armies that caused such enormous destruction did not occupy the countries they punished, as the Romans and Greeks did. Their conquests resembled those of Tamerlane. As the monarchs became effeminate, new powers arose, especially Media, which under Cyaxares finally brought about the ruin of Assyria. The last monarch was probably the Sardanapalus of the Greeks. The fall of this great monarchy was so swift and so complete that even Nineveh, its capital, disappeared from existence. Herodotus found no trace of it in his time, and only recent excavations have identified its site. Yet, it must have been a great city. As the excavations now show it, its eastern wall measured 15,900 feet, or about 3 miles. The city probably included extensive suburbs with fortified towers, giving it a circumference of 480 stadias, or 60 miles, the 3 days' journey of Jonah. It is thought that, including the suburbs, it held 500,000 people. The palaces of the great were large and magnificent, but the homes of ordinary people were poor structures of sun-dried brick. The palaces had many chambers around a central hall open to the sky, since no pillars needed to support a roof have been found. The walls show no traces of windows. They were lined with slabs of coarse marble bearing cuneiform inscriptions. Little is known of the fronts of the palaces except that their entrances were bordered by groups of colossal bulls. These were sculpted with considerable vigor, but art in the Greek sense of the word did not exist. In the ordinary comforts and tools of life, the Assyrians were probably equal to the Egyptians, but savage passions and degrading superstitions corrupted them. They left nothing for later ages to use. Nothing from their existence has contributed to civilization. They provided no models of literature, art, or government. While Nineveh was rising to greatness, Babylon lay under an eclipse, a condition that lasted 650 years. This eclipse began in the year 1273. A great change came in the era of Narbonasar BC. 747, when Babylon threatened to establish its independence. It later forced Esarhaddon, the Assyrian monarch, to take the government of Babylon into his own hands in BC. 680. In 625 BC, the old Chaldeans recovered their political importance, probably through an alliance with the Medes. Nabopolassar gained undisputed possession of Babylon and established a short but brilliant dynasty. He received a share of the captives of Nineveh and increased the population of his capital. His son Nebuchadnezzar was sent as general against the Egyptians. He defeated their king Necho, reconquered all the lands bordering Egypt, and received the submission of Jehoiakim of Jerusalem. Nabopolassar's death called his son back to Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar's great reign began in B.C. 604. Nebuchadnezzar enlarged the capital so extensively that he may almost be said to have built it. According to Herodotus, it stood as a square on both banks of the Euphrates, measured 48 miles around, and covered 200 square miles, enough land to support a substantial population through agriculture alone. If Herodotus is accepted, the city walls were 350 feet high and 87 feet thick. They were strengthened by 250 towers and pierced by 100 gates of brass. Quays lined the river, and a stone bridge joined the two parts of the city. A fortified palace stood at each end of the bridge. The greatest achievement of the royal architect was the new palace with its adjoining hanging garden, a series of terraces made to resemble hills in order to please his Median queen. The palace and garden together measured 8 miles around, and were magnificently decorated with statues of men and animals. There the mighty monarch rested after his great military campaigns and dreamed of omnipotence, until a sudden madness, the kind that makes a man mistake himself for a brute animal, drove him from his luxurious halls into the gardens he had planted. His madness lasted 7 years. He died in B.C. 561 after a reign of 43 years, and his son Evil Merodach ruled in his place. Evil Merodach was put to death 2 years later for lawlessness and intemperance. His brother-in-law and murderer, Neriglissar, succeeded him. The monarchy declined so quickly that, after a few short reigns, the army of Cyrus entered Babylon. The last king, Belshazzar, or Belshazzar, who was associated with his father Nabonidus, was killed in B.C. 538. Thus the Chaldean monarchy ended, 1790, 6 years after Nimrod built Babel, according to the chronology most convenient to assume. The third great Oriental monarchy to come into contact with the Jews was that of the Medes and Persians. It arose after the Assyrian and Babylonian empires dissolved. The nations discussed so far were either Hamite or Shemite, but attention now turns to a different people, the descendants of Japhet. Madai, Japhet's third son, was the ancestor of the Medes. Their country reached from the Caspian Sea in the north to the mountains of Persia in the south, and from the highlands of Armenia and the Tigris range in the west to the great desert of Iran in the east. It included many climates and was crossed by mountains whose valleys produced abundant grain and fruit. The best part of the country was a high region enclosed by branches of the Armenian mountains. It surrounded the basin of the great lake Euramizu, which stood 4,200 feet above the sea, and the valleys of the ancient Smerdis and the Araxes, the northern boundary of the land. In this mountain region stood Tabris, the pleasant summer residence of the modern Persian Shahs. The slopes of the Tigros provided excellent pasture, and the famous horses known to the ancients as Nisaean were raised there. The eastern districts were flat and unhealthy where they descended to the shores of the Caspian Sea, and rugged and barren where they met the desert of Iran. The people of this country were hardy and brave, and especially skilled in riding horses. Until the rise of the Greeks, they were the greatest warriors of the ancient world. Herodotus called them Aryans. In the earliest ages, they had spread across the highlands of western Asia and divided into various tribes. The first reference to this Aryan, or Aryan, people appears in the inscriptions on the Black Obelisk of Nimrod, BC 880. This seems to have been about the time when they immigrated into Media, and they were then exposed to Assyrian attacks. The first king to threaten their independence was the monarch whose victories are recorded on the Black Obelisk in the British Museum. He made a raid into Media rather than conquered it. Sargon, the third monarch of the Lower Empire, achieved something close to a conquest and populated the cities he founded with Jewish captives from Samaria, BC 710. Media then became the easternmost province of his empire, though the conquest was undoubtedly incomplete. The Median princes paid tribute to the kings of Nineveh or withheld it, depending on their circumstances. This placed the beginning of the Median monarchy in 875, but Herodotus, probably with greater accuracy, dated it to BC 708. After Media revolted from Assyria, Deioces was elected and reigned for 53 years. This king's history comes through Grecian sources and cannot be greatly trusted. According to the legends, the 7 Median tribes, scattered among separate villages, endured all the miseries of anarchy until Deioces became famous as the judge of their disputes. He then withdrew into private life. Anarchy returned, the people demanded a king, and Deioces was elected. He created a despotic government centered at Ecbatana, which he made his capital. It was built on a hill, with the royal palace at its summit. There the king ruled in seclusion, conducting all affairs through spies, informers, petitions, and decrees. This is the account given by Rawlinson and followed by Smith. The great Median kingdom truly began with Cyrus, about BC 633, while the Assyrian Empire was declining. He emerged from obscurity, like Attila, Genghis Khan, and other eastern conquerors, at the head of irresistible hordes. He swept everything before him and built an enormous power. This period was marked by a great movement among the Turanian races, the Cimmerians, who lived north of the Danube. According to Herodotus, they made a major invasion of Asia Minor, where some tribes settled permanently. At the same time, the Scythians came from Central Asia, overran Media, crossed the Zagros Mountains, entered Mesopotamia, passed through Syria into Egypt, and ruled western Asia until Cyrus expelled them. He established his new kingdom only after a severe struggle between the Scythian and Aryan peoples, who had previously shared the tablelands of Media. For age after age, the Turanian peoples have pressed southward, and Cyrus successfully resisted one of these great movements, the first recorded in history. These nomads of Tartary, or Scythian tribes, overran western Asia in the 7th century before Christ. Under the later names of Huns, Avari, Bulgarians, Magyars, Turks, and Mongols, they devastated Europe and Asia for 15 successive centuries. They have been the scourge of the race, and their invasions began before Grecian history opened. Cyrus learned from these Scythian invaders arts of war that had not previously been practiced, including archery and cavalry maneuvers. He was then ready to extend his empire westward across Armenia and Asia Minor, as far as the river Halys. He fought a war in Lydia with the father of Croesus. Before making these conquests, however, he probably captured and destroyed Nineveh BC 625. He was aided there by the entire Babylonian force under Nabopolassar, an old Assyrian general who had rebelled. As a reward, Nabopolassar obtained the hand of Cyaxares' daughter for his son, Nebuchadnezzar. The final Assyrian monarch, whom the Greeks called Sardanapalus, burned himself in his palace rather than fall into the hands of the Median conqueror. The fall of Nineveh brought Babylon independence and remarkable growth, and it also opened the way for Median conquests westward to Lydia. The war with Lydia continued for 6 years, and had mixed results, until a Babylonian prince mediated peace. Peace was made because an eclipse of the sun occurred during a great battle and filled both armies with superstitious fear. When peace was concluded, Astyages, the son of the Median king, married the daughter of Elias, the Lydian monarch, and Media and Lydia formed an alliance. At that time, Lydia included nearly all of Asia Minor west of the Halys. Its early history is obscure. The dynasty that occupied its throne when the Medes invaded had been founded by Deioces BC 724. He began the attacks on the Grecian colonies that Croesus later completed. During the reign of his successor, Ardes, Asia Minor was devastated by the Cimmerians. They came from the country north of the Black Sea, between the Danube and the Sea of Azov, having been driven away by a flood of Scythians like the one that later desolated Media. These Cimmerians burned the great temple of Diana at Ephesus and destroyed Sardis, the capital city. Alyattes, the king against whom Cyaxares had fought, expelled them from Lydia. Cyaxares reigned 40 years and was succeeded by Astyages, BC. 593. Astyages' history is entirely blank until near the end of his long reign of 35 years, when the Persians under Cyrus rose to power. He seems to have given himself up to the usual fate of Oriental kings, effeminacy and luxury produced by the prosperity he inherited. He was a contemporary of Croesus, the celebrated king of Lydia, whose life Herodotus has surrounded with so much romantic interest. Croesus was the first of the Asiatic kings to begin hostile aggression against the Greeks. After making himself master of all the Greek states of Asia Minor, he fought a power destined to overthrow the older monarchies of the East, the Persians, a people closely related to the Medes in race, language, and religion. The Persians first enter history as a tough, warlike people, simple in their habits and contemptuous of luxury. They had little cultivation in art and science, but they possessed great wit and a poetic imagination. They lived in the mountainous country, southwest of Iran, where the Great Plain slopes down toward the Persian Gulf. The coast was hot and dry, as was the eastern region where the mountains gave way to the table land of Iran. Between these areas, which resembled the Arabian desert, lay the highlands at the end of the Zagros chain. These rough regions, with their fertile valleys, were well suited to growing corn, grapes, and fruit and provided excellent grazing for flocks. In the north was the beautiful plain of Shiraz, the favorite residence of the modern Shahs. In the valley of Ben Damir stood the old capital of Persepolis, whose ruins show the magnificence of the palaces of Darius and Xerxes. Persia proper was a small land, 300 miles from north to south and 280 from east to west. It was inhabited by an Aryan race that had brought with it, from the country beyond the Indus, its own religion, language, and political institutions. Its language was closely related to the Aryan dialects of India and to the languages of modern Europe. The Persians were therefore noble representatives of the great Indo-European family, whose civilization has spread throughout the world. Their religion was the least corrupted among the ancient races. It was marked by a strong wish to reach truth, and in the time of the Gnostics it became part of the speculations of the Christian fathers, of whom Origen was the leading type. Their teachers were the Magi, a wise and learned caste. Some of them came to Jerusalem in the time of Herod, guided by the star in the east, to ask about the birth of Christ. They tried to solve the mysteries of creation, but the basic principle of their religion was the worship of all the elements, especially fire. The Persians also believed in two opposing principles, good and evil. This belief was called dualism, and they had brought it from India. Rawlinson believes that the Persians differed in religion from the earliest people of India, whose Vedas, or sacred books, were founded on monotheism in its spiritual and personal form, and that they were forced to migrate westward because of the heresy of dualism. The Medes, with whom the Persians later became associated, favored the old elemental worship of nature that they had learned from the Turanian or Scythic population. The greatest man among the Persians was Zoroaster or Zerdesht, probably born in B.C. 589. He is remembered forever, not because of his personal history, whose details are unknown, but because of the ideas that became the foundation of Persian faith. He impressed his mind upon the nation just as Muhammad later impressed his upon Arabia. His central belief was dualism, the existence of the two powers of good and evil, with good ultimately destined to prevail. To this old Persian dualistic creed he added a reformed Magian worship of the elements. That worship had gained influence among the Chaldean priests and had originally come from the Scythic invaders. Magism could not have come from the Semitic races, whose original religion was theism, like that of Melchizedek and Abraham. Nor could it have come from the Japhetic or Indo-European races whose worship was polytheism, the worship of personal gods with separate names, such as Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The first people to yield to Magism were the Medes. They adopted the religion of the older settlers, the Scythic tribes who were their subjects, and this faith replaced the old Aryan religion. The Persians, the finest branch of the Aryan races, were especially military in all their habits and ambitions. Their nobles, riding a famous breed of horses, made up the finest cavalry in the world. Their infantry was also excellent, armed with lances, shields, and bows. Their mountain life, simple habits, and strict discipline kept their military spirit alive. Astyages, as already described, was the last of the Median kings. According to Herodotus, he married his daughter to Cambyses, a Persian noble, rather than arrange a higher match among the Median princes, so that a dream would not come true. Her offspring would conquer Asia. When the dream returned, he tried to destroy the child she was about to bear. The child was saved by a herdsman. When he was 10 years old, his playfellows in the mountains chose him to be their king. In this role, he had the son of a noble Median scourged for disobedience. The boy's father complained to Astyages. The Median monarch then discovered the child's lineage from the herdsman and from his officer, Harpens, to whom he had entrusted the order to destroy him. In hidden anger, he invited this noble to a feast and served him the flesh of his own son. Harpagus took revenge by joining with discontented nobles and inviting Cyrus, this boy king, now the bravest youth of his age and country, to revolt. Cyrus led his troops against Astyages, defeated him, and captured the sovereign. His great reign began in B.C. 558. The overthrow of Astyages brought war between Lydia and Persia. Croesus hurried to attack the usurper and defend his father-in-law. He formed an alliance with Babylonia and Egypt. The three most powerful monarchs in the world were thus united against Cyrus, who was ready to face their confederation. Croesus was defeated and withdrew to his capital, Smerdis. The following spring, while he was calling on his allies, Cyrus attacked him unexpectedly and defeated him again. Croesus then retired to Sardia, which was strongly fortified. The Persians besieged the city, and it fell after a short siege. Croesus himself was spared, and in adversity he gave wise advice to his conqueror. Cyrus left a Lydian in command of the captured city and went home. A revolt followed, leading to conflict between Persia and the Greek colonies and to the subjection of the Grecian cities by Harpagus, the general of Cyrus. Then came the conquest of Asia Minor, which took several years and was carried out by the generals of Cyrus. Cyrus himself was needed in Media to strengthen his power. He then extended his conquests eastward and subdued the entire plateau of Iran as far as the mountain separating it from the Indus. 15 years of brilliant military success passed before he laid siege to Babylon in B.C. 538. After the fall of that great city, Cyrus made it the imperial capital of his vast dominion. There he issued his decree allowing the Jews to return to their ancient territory and rebuild their temple after 70 years of captivity. The decree was based on the sound military policy of maintaining Palestine, a frontier territory, against his enemies in Asia Minor. He knew that the Jews would do all they could to defend it. He carried out this policy with generous nobility, returning to the Jews the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken away. For more than 2 centuries, Persia had no warmer friends and allies than the obedient and loyal subjects of Judea. Cyrus died in battle against a tribe of Scythians east of the Caspian Sea in B.C. 529. He was the greatest general the Oriental world ever produced and can fairly be ranked with Alexander himself. His 29-year reign was an unbroken succession of wars in which he was always successful, and his success was matched only by his magnanimity. His empire stretched from the Indus to the Hellespont and the Syrian coast, far larger than either Assyria or Babylonia. The Persian conquest, however, gave the conquerors habits of extreme luxury and led them far from their original way of life. This weakened the empire and prepared it for rapid decline. Cambyses, the son and successor of Cyrus, continued his father's policy of conquest. Unlike his father, he was a tyrant and a sensualist, although he had considerable military ability. He conquered Phoenicia, becoming master of the sea as well as the land. He then quarreled with Cambyses, the king of Egypt, and conquered his kingdom. While he was in Egypt, Cambyses acted like an eastern despot. In a moment of madness and caprice, he killed his brother Smerdis. Imagine happened to look remarkably like the murdered prince. With the help of his own brother, whom the king had left as governor of his household, this Magan seized the throne of Persia while Cambyses was away. The death of the real Smerdis had been carefully concealed. Cambyses heard of the usurpation as he was returning from an expedition to Syria. An accidental wound from the point of his sword became fatal in B.C. 522. As he was dying, he summoned his nobles, admitted that he had murdered his brother, and urged them to keep the kingdom from falling into the hands of the Medes. He left no children. The usurper proved to be a tyrant. The Persians formed a conspiracy, led by the descendants of Cyrus and Darius. Their chief and the son of Hystaspes became king of Persia after Smerdis had ruled for 7 months. Brief as this reign was, it restored the old Magian priests to power. Through their magical arts, they were very popular with the people, among both the Medes and the Persians. Darius restored the temples and worship that the Magian priests had overthrown, and he established the religion of Zoroaster. Rebellions in Babylonia and Media disturbed the first years of his rule, but he suppressed them and continued the conquest Cyrus had begun. He invaded India and Scythia, while his general, Megabazus, conquered Thrace and the Greek cities of the Hellespont. The king of Macedonia recognized the supremacy of the great monarch of Asia, and gave the customary gift of earth and water. At last Darius returned to Susa to enjoy the results of his victories, and the pleasures provided by his vast empire. For 20 years his glory was unequaled in the east and his life was peaceful. But in B.C. 500, the Ionian cities began a great revolt. It was at first put down, but the Atticans defeated the Persian warriors at Marathon in B.C. 490. This great victory changed the whole course of Asiatic conquest. Darius made enormous preparations for another invasion of Greece, but died before they were completed. He died in B.C. 485 after ruling for 36 years and left a name greater than that of any Oriental sovereign except Cyrus. Unfortunately for Darius and his dynasty, he had challenged the spirit of Western liberty, then at its height in the cities of Greece. His successor, Xerxes, inherited his power but not his genius. Xerxes rashly provoked Europe with further invasions while he lived without glory in his seraglio. He was murdered in his palace, the usual fate of the great tyrants of Eastern monarchies. No change of administration could occur except through an assassin's dagger. That may have been a poor remedy, but it was no worse than the disease itself. This tyrant was the Ahasuerus of the scriptures. There is no need to trace the fortunes of the feeble princes who followed Xerxes. The Persian monarchy had now become corrupt and weak, and Alexander easily conquered it. He finally destroyed the power of Persia in B.C. 330. This was well. The Persian monarchy was an absolute despotism, like that of Turkey. Its monarch controlled not only the actions of his subjects, but even owned their land. He delegated his authority to satraps, who governed only while he wished them to do so. Their rule was marked by every kind of extortion, though they were sometimes punished when it became especially outrageous and well known. Like pashas, the satraps were practically independent princes. They exercised all the rights of sovereigns as long as they kept the confidence of the supreme monarch and regularly sent him the required tribute. The satrapies were generally granted to members of the royal family, or to great nobles connected to it by marriage. The monarch ruled without a council, and the laws rested on the principle that the king's will was supreme. Assassination was the only restraint he feared, and he usually lived in seclusion in his seraglio at Susa, Babylon, or Ecbatana. The Persian Empire was the last of the great monarchies of the Oriental world, which had flourished for 2,000 years. When nations became wicked or spread over a large territory, the patriarchal government of the primitive ages was no longer effective. Yet men had to be governed somehow. In a general condition of rudeness, pastoral simplicity, or oligarchical usurpation, the irresponsible despotism of the East was the form of government providence supplied for the different Semitic, Hamite, and Japhetic races. The last great monarchy was the best. It was ruled by the descendants of Japhet, in fulfillment of the prediction that he would dwell in the tents of Shem, and that Canaan would be his servant. Before following the progress of the descendants of Japhet in Greece, where a new civilization arose to improve society through the free agency shown in art, science, literature, and government, and through the rise of free institutions, we will look briefly at the nations of Asia Minor that came into contact with the powers just considered.
And so the last of the great Oriental despotisms runs its course. Cyrus falls in a far Scythian battle. His son Cambyses murders his own brother. A false Smerdis wears the crown for 7 months, and then the line of Darius carries Persia to a height from which it challenges, fatally, the small free cities of Greece. Marathon is the first crack. Xerxes, the Ahasuerus of the Book of Esther, is the beginning of the end, and in due time a young Macedonian named Alexander will sweep the whole vast, luxurious, satrap-ridden thing away. Notice what Lord keeps pressing on us, that these empires of 2,000 years, Chaldean, Assyrian, Median, Persian, were each in turn the master of the world, and each in turn rotted from within on tribute and luxury and the assassin's knife, and that the freest and best of them, the Persian, was the one that let God's people go. Next time, in part 5, before we cross over at last into Greece and the birth of free institutions, we pause among the nations these giants brushed against the kingdoms of Asia Minor and the sea-roving traders of Phoenicia. Thank you for keeping the story with me. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. One last thing before you go. There is a part on our stage still wanting a voice, and it may as well be yours. Come and read for us at footnotesandfolly.click, and be in the next telling rather than only watching it. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there is a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.